So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and here we are in a rather misty day in the fields of Rhudaur for what should be, if nothing else, a very interesting custom scenario that was given to me by Theron, who I believe his in-game name is actually Stormhawk on this occasion. But this one is rather interesting because it is in essence a free-for-all scenario, but there are decisions that will have to be made by the players on the fly essentially, because Cardolan are going to be under attack by two forces. First of all, they will be attacked by the wild men, who clearly want to claim more fertile grounds for themselves. Everyone knows, after all, that Dunland and Rhudaur are not exactly the finest in terms of bits of land that you could be given, so trying to take over some more prime real estate in Cardolan is perhaps on the cards. But later on in the battle, about half an hour in game time, the Misty Mountains will be arriving. The orcs and goblins of Moria will also be marching upon the defensive positions, the little farmsteads that Cardolan occupy here, and at which point the Wildmen armies will have a choice. They will have the choice to continue attacking Cardolan, or they can choose to redeem themselves at the last moment and instead join Cardolan in killing off the orcs of Moria. So in that case, the objectives for Rhudaur here are really rather fluid, in the sense that initially their goal will be to destroy Cardolan and take over the settlement. When the orcs of Moria arrive, however, things become a little bit different, because they can continue to attack Cardolan and try and drive them from the settlement, or they can join with Cardolan to try and take out the general of the Moria armies, which of course is Cardolan's objective, to try and kill off the Misty Mountains Chief General, which of course the Misty Mountains joining in the fight later, they will be much fresher, they will be in a much better condition, so it'll be easier for them to defend their general, even though it is the sort of victory condition which can be quite a difficult one to manage if you're the Misty Mountains, because one stray ballista bolt after all and your general will die. But I have faith in the fact that by the time the Misty Mountains arrive, things will be a little bit more of a dicey situation. Cardolan, of course, they don't really have too much of a choice in this situation, nor do Moria, but they're going to have to hope, I think, that the wild men instead decide to join their side, but we shall have to wait and see on that one. Cardolan should have some decent defensive troops after all, but we shall start off with the attacking army that will make their appearance on the farms first and foremost, which is going to be Rhudaur. We have the Womb Raider over here, who has got some Dunland hunters on the front. Going up against Cardolan initially will be, I think, it's probably good that the objectives of Rhudaur are somewhat fluid, because I would imagine that throwing themselves on a pretty well prepared and decently high quality Cardolan defensive line is going to be pretty risky for them, unless they can close the distance and really use that armour piercing and throwing projectiles. But given the state of the map, I would imagine that Cardolan will have their own skirmishers in position, but the Dunland hunters should be, I mean, they'll do the job at skirmishing with the enemy well enough. I mean, they're going to be efficient as they can be in that regard, but they're not going to win you the long range battle. Rhudaur very much more of a faction about that up close punch. Dunland pikemen as well will help to shore up the line, but again, in this regard, Cardolan have certainly got the better phalanx in terms of their basic pike units. Both Rhudaur and Cardolan, however, can call upon a significantly higher tier unit of pikes as well. We shall see if Rhudaur have any of them in tow. Several units of Rhudaur swordsmen, their numbers will come in handy, of course. I mean, in this situation is one of the rare occasions perhaps where the more numerous evil faction actually will probably have a morale advantage over Cardolan, so swarming over them with units like this could be a real problem for Cardolan to have to deal with, especially given that Moria are going to be on their way later, the orcs of the Misty Mountains, and the numbers that they're going to have to face, regardless of how this battle goes, really are going to be fairly extreme. So plenty of Rhudaur swordsmen here, several units of them, so a large Rhudaur force, but relatively one note in terms of the units they actually have available to them. Ettenmore's Troll Hunters are another good unit to have in this situation, of course, because you can punch through defensive positions of Cardolan, or you can do damage to the more dangerous elements of the Moria army later on, if that is how you want to approach things. When you're besieging an area, of course, it always pays to have a catapult. Interesting if the wild men do decide to team up with Cardolan in this battle, because these goblins will also have had a change of heart, which I find a little bit more difficult to believe, but regardless of that, the catapult will be useful for bombarding the Cardolan position initially, which is, I imagine, what they will use it for, given how entrenched Cardolan currently are. He's also got some Dunland spearmen back here, so certainly not the most high quality of Rhudaur armies that the Womb Raider has, but a very numerous one, like I said, so it could end up being that, I mean, Moria will probably be the chief benefactors from this if Rhudaur do not decide to team up with Cardolan, because that those numbers will wear Cardolan down a little bit. They'll certainly chew up some of their ammunition, which can only be a benefit to Moria unless Rhudaur can pull some trickery. We shall have to wait and see. Rhudaur clansmen are a little bit tankier, and there's also some Dunland pikemen and more Dunland hunters on the front. And then over here we have Dunland, played by Mevin, so the other Wildmen faction again. They have no choice really but to be numbers focused. They only have so many options when it comes to their higher tier units. Dunlanding veterans are kind of similar to the Rhudaur swordsmen, only they trade in a few of their numbers for having slightly better offensive stats with those one-handed axes. Yeah, but in this situation I would probably prefer the Rhudaur swordsman because the extra damage is nice and could be useful against Moria, perhaps more so than Cardolan, but we'll have to wait and see. I mean, they'll do the same sort of job anyway. They'll be your front line, but they won't be too exceptional at it. Spears of Orthanc are a very strong unit, of course, a very heavy unit of crossbows, very damaging both at range and in melee, and they will of course be central to the efforts of the Wildmen to try and secure victory in the field today. Several units of Half-Orc Spearguard, again, kind of an interesting unit to have a change of heart if that is indeed what the Wildmen decide to do, although I suppose they are only half-orcs, which again the implications of that are rather unpleasant, aren't they? But here they are, Half-Orc Spearguard, a bit more of a defensive unit than the Dunlanding veterans here. Got a unit of Dunman Outrunners as well, so a little bit of fast moving cavalry, which again, considering there are several areas on this map which are a little bit more open, it'll be interesting to see how effective a unit of lighter cavalry like that can be. More Dunman Spearmen, some Half-Orc Baneguard for the extra bit of armour piercing again will be useful against both Cardolan and Moria, regardless of which Dunland end up facing in the long run with this unit. More Dunman Spearmen, some Dunlanding Clansmen as well, several units of them. Heightened anti-cavalry bonus, and also of course yet more high number units on the field. More Clansmen and more Dunman Pikemen, but not an overly high quality force this from the Wildmen, so perhaps rather lore appropriate for the kind of force they'll be able to scrabble together in such numbers. Now then, the other attacking army which will arrive later in better condition will be the Orcs and Goblins of Moria. The Orcs of the Misty Mountains here. Stormhawk has got some Mountain Uruk hosts, so already we're seeing that they have got a higher quality unit of line infantry than really anything that the attackers have at their disposal today, obviously on a par really with Uruk infantry, so a very good unit to be using to try and sweep the battered remnants of perhaps both of the enemy armies, or perhaps just trying to wrest control from Cardolan from the field. Some Goblin Archers over here as well. Again, they're not going to win any skirmish fights against Cardolan with a unit like that, but they can at least contest it, which is all they're designed to do. Heavy Goblin Halberds, considering they're going to be arriving later, perhaps when there's a little bit less ammunition, they could actually be surprisingly effective, even despite their relatively low quality. Goblin Archers, Mountain Orc Berserkers, which of course are locked morale, which, given the somewhat fragile nature of a lot of the Misty Mountains army, is actually a very useful thing for them to have. Heavy Goblin Spears are a defensive unit with that armour piercing as well, makes them a good multifaceted tool for the Misty Mountains to use on the front line. Blackback Mountain Berserkers are very, very dangerous against all the units we've seen so far. Several units of Black Uruks of the mountains, Cave Trolls, 2 units of them, and then you can see some Warg Riders as well, and at the back several units of Heavy Goblin Infantry as well. So perhaps not too surprising to see pretty decent high quality army this from Moria, at least as far as the Misty Mountains armies go. So again, that's part of the conundrum of this battle. What will the Wildmen do, and what can Cardolan do if the Wildmen decide not to turn on the Goblins of Moria? We shall have to wait and see. Y2K, I don't know if this is the key general to look out for or not, but the Goblin King's Bodyguard are here, and this is pretty much the standard place to put your general if you are playing as the Misty Mountains, a decently defensive unit, and you don't take away your Blackback's ability to hide if you do put your general in said unit. Snarger Skirmishers for yet more javelin fire for perhaps Cardolan to have to try and deal with again. Goblin Infantry, more Goblin Infantry, and then more Goblin Infantry. So I would assume that the idea behind this is Y2K can then look after the general more effectively, as these units are only designed to be a foil for the significantly higher quality units that Stormhawk has got overall. But yeah, this is not a full army after all, so that is worth bearing in mind. So it's technically 1 1/4 armies for Moria, but the quality they have is higher than that which we saw from the Wildmen. And finally we shall move on to the defending armies here, starting off with Tommy the Wise. He's got some Minhiriath Spearmen who'll be ready to hold the front line. I mean, they'll hold the front line decently enough, but when you start to factor in javelin fire, the higher quality of the Moria troops, a little bit of armour piercing perhaps from those Baneguard that we saw from the Wildmen, they're certainly going to need some support. I mean, there's some cavalry back here. Mercenary cavalry will actually be pretty good at dealing with those Dunman Outrunners, but as soon as it comes to dealing with walks and stuff like that, the mercenary cavalry simply aren't good enough to really perform the role of being that melee cavalry blocker that you need them to be, which is kind of an issue with a lot of 1 HP cavalry, especially lower tier 1 HP cavalry in general, but still it is a tool that Tommy has been given and he will have to try and make the best of it. Some Greenway Garrison footmen, like I said, This is the kind of thing which Cardolan can really use to their advantage. Some nice pikes for them. Some more Minhiriath Spearmen, a very good unit of defensive archers in the Hearthguard of Amon-Sul. These kind of defensive units are something which Cardolan are going to have to leverage against their numerous attackers here. They're going to have to try and dig in, entrench themselves, and hope that they can wear the enemy down with such things. Minhiriath Men-at-Arms, very similar to Minhiriath Spearmen, only they're going to be able to deal slightly more damage in return, which will actually be really useful against the lower tier, more numerous units that they're going to be facing off against, because they'll be able to cut through them with a bit more efficiency, even if they will die off a little bit more quickly. Greenway Garrison Spearmen guarding the high ground, again lower tier units which Cardolan are certainly not without, and the numbers will actually be useful given the kind of forces they're going up against today. Minhiriath Spearmen again, more pikes, more men-at-arms. There is actually a ballista up on the hill there which could be excellent for sniping out that Moria general, but they may have to use it sooner. After all, if they get swept from the hills by the wild men before Moria even arrive, that would do no good whatsoever. So it'll be interesting to see if they can actually afford to conserve that ammunition as they may want to. Another unit of mercenary cavalry for Tommy here, and then the final army on the field today played by Mech Thorn. He has got some mercenary guildsmen, again armour piercing, which will be more useful against the higher end Moria units that we will see later on, more so than the wild men early, so they will probably be best off being saved. Minhiriath Men-at-Arms quite the opposite. That'd be really good against the wild men. Greenway Garrison archers for skirmishing, as well as some Minhiriath archers. The Dunedain captains, which there isn't an overabundance of really high-end units on the field today, so a unit like this actually gives you a really tremendous power spike, and again, they'll be really good at mopping through those, smashing through those lower tier wild men and goblin units. Greenway Garrison Spearmen, there is a unit of crossbows here as well. Again, the kind of units that we usually see factions really rely upon here are in shorter supply on this occasion, so they're going to have to be a little bit more frugal with the ammunition in a unit like this. Going to have to use it at the right time. Same for the trebuchet. I mean, there is more examples of artillery on the field, I suppose, but the trebuchet could be absolutely vital in terms of winning this battle. There are plenty of routes through this little area. There's plenty of defensive positions they can take up in the hills. They've decided to abandon the farmsteads for now. I do wonder if there are any units up here. It doesn't look like it, because of course on the minimap we can only see so many units. It's one of those where it's kind of bugged out a little bit and we can't see all of them, sadly enough. We shall see if Cardolan elect to try and send some units into the town. I would imagine they won't, because they really want to try and dig in and deal with the high numbers army that's coming towards them. But we will make a little bit of a cut. There is a time limit as well for the attackers to try and defeat Cardolan. If the time limit runs out, then messengers will arrive back to Cardolan's capital of Tharbad to warn them of the impending attack and then fully immobilise their armies, in which case it's an automatic victory for Cardolan. So we shall see if that does turn out to be the case, but I will make a cut regardless, because it's going to take a little while for the wild men to cross through the farmsteads and start attacking Cardolan in their defensive position in the hills. So I'll make a cut and we'll rejoin when the battle is about to get underway. So here we go then, as the bandits have revealed themselves here from Mech Thorn's army. The Dunlanders have arrived. It is interesting actually, in the fact that the wild men haven't been lurching forward too quickly or too desperately, considering there is a time limit. They have been a little bit more considered about things, and Cardolan do have units that can hide after all, and the deployment zone was rather big, and as it has turned out, there have been a few units left behind to provide at least a little bit of an ambush in and amongst the settlements that Cardolan have since abandoned to take up a more defensive position in the hills. I don't necessarily know how useful this little ambush is going to be. I mean, this cavalry charging from the mercenary cavalry that has come down from the hills to support these few ambush units may be able to do a little bit of damage, but the Dunlanders here managing to turn around, and of course this is where the additional anti-cavalry bonus of all of these Dunlanding troops is going to be very, very useful, especially against a unit which is as mentally fragile as the mercenary cavalry. As they start taking losses, it's unlikely that they'll be able to take too much more of that kind of punishment. Lumbermen are in here as well, and they are surrounded. I mean, the level of troops that they're facing here from the wild men is not overly impressive, which is going to allow the Lumbermen to survive a little bit longer than they otherwise would in melee. The armour piercing will allow them to crack through that chainmail that the Dunlanding veterans are also wearing, but yeah, they're not going to survive too much longer. Their own melee defence is simply too poor. The bandits are leaving as the Dunland spearmen are here. The Gwathlo trackers also trying to do a little bit of damage for Cardolan, but they were being skirmished too viciously by all of the Rhudaur archers that are in behind over there, Dunland hunters, simply in too great numbers. And if you're going to do an ambush like this, you need to be there in slightly higher numbers than Cardolan were, but an ambush is a risky thing. If they front-loaded their defence here in the settlement too much in open terrain against the kind of numbers the wild men are fielding, if it went wrong, Cardolan could very well have been staring down the barrel of a rather quick defeat in this battle, one way or the other, whether that be via the goblins or the wild men. As it is, though, they haven't lost enough to consider themselves to be too much on the back foot in this battle, but it's not the way that Cardolan would have been hoping for their defence of this tract of land to begin. I'm actually impressed by how resilient these lumbermen have been. They're still steady, which is kind of bizarre. I do wonder how that might be. They should surely be routing at this point. Nonetheless, maybe the desire to defend their home is greater than their fear of the Northmen and the Dunlanders. Perhaps this is the case. Either way, well, actually no, you can see the Gwatho trackers have returned, and they are going to try and fire into the wild men as they push into position, but there's not really any good targets for the archers to be going after. The cavalry's down here as well, but clansmen, Dunlanding clansmen and Dunman spearmen are not exactly the kind of units that the Gwatho trackers would really like to be facing off against. Here you can see the mercenary cavalry do actually charge into the Dunlanding veterans before they turn around this time. So this charge is going to be a little bit more effective, but there's not really enough of the mercenary cavalry at this point for them to be having a super impact on the Dunlanders, but still just nibbling away at their manpower for the time being is probably the best that they can expect. Now they're going to get on here. They do actually manage to get up to charge speed there as well, but the Rhudaur swordsmen do mostly turn around to meet their advance. Balance of forces is evenly matched, which doesn't sound right to me at all. And the main body of the Rhudaur army over here as well, only a couple of units of spears, swordsmen and a unit of archers pushed forward earlier. Now they're moving in, they're going to try and get a charge into the Dunman archers, or hunters I should say, and they do manage to do that. Again, they are melee cavalry, the mercenary cavalry, and very basic ones at that, so these charges are not going to be having an extreme impact, but as many kills as they can get at this point will be a bit of a bonus, because this unit is certainly not going to be a decisive factor in this battle, you would have thought. Probably want to be avoiding the Dunman spearmen if you can help it. Again, they're going to be able to get a charge off into those Dunman hunters, proving to be a fairly effective annoyance, this one little cavalry unit. Again, I'm a little bit surprised that their morale is not worse than it is. They're still steady, and they're mercenaries as well, so their morale tends to be extremely poor, especially when they're going up against black wolves as well. It's a little bit peculiar. Maybe there's some sort of custom effect added to this scenario where Cardolan's morale has been made locked for all their units. That would be my suspicion, because surely they're mercenaries. Cardolan's morale is pretty bad anyway. I mean, they're dead. It doesn't really matter. They weren't going to be that effective anyway, but it's an interesting little thing to take note of. And I don't believe there's going to be too much else happening at the moment. I mean, the Dunlanders are going to be pushing forward, so we will go up to times 6 speed. It's a little bit of a strange opening to this battle, a little bit fragmented in terms of the action that I can actually commentate on. But it is, in a way, that's kind of surprising, because there is a time limit on this battle, so the wild men can't really afford to be messing around too much, and that may be the reasoning behind Cardolan putting up a token effort in the settlement over here, because it just delays the forces of Dunland and Rhudaur from pushing through the settlement. Dunlanding veterans taking a bit of damage. They are now in range of the Cardolan archer line, the Mahiriap archers, primarily a defensive archer by trade, with their armour values and such. But they will be able to do more damage than the kind of archers that we've seen so far. Maybe level pegging actually with the Gwatho trackers. Still that other unit of mercenary cavalry. It's rather ironic that Cardolan have got access to plenty of lancers, and yet the only cavalry unit that they have on the field today is the one unit that isn't that great at charging into infantry such as this. But the other unit of mercenary cavalry now moving forward. They're going to try and go after this unit of battered and bruised Dunlanding veterans. Well, that may have been the the idea, but it wasn't executed on all that effectively. As the cavalry sweeps across the hill. And I do believe the archers have also fallen silent for the time being. What have we here? Cardolan's got a defensive position over here, which Rhudaur are going to be attacking immediately. Some Greenway Garrison archers in behind a single unit of Greenway Garrison spearmen. So again, this is a little bit of a token effort in terms of the defence. One unit of basic Greenway spears is not going to be able to stop several units of Rhudaur infantry. The Garrison archers are going to try and whittle down the attacks as they move forward, but this is where the hexagonal shields of the Rhudaur swordsmen will come in handy. They will mitigate some of that damage, and once they get onto the front line here, this is the kind of fight in which the Rhudaur swordsmen should be really efficient. I mean, the Dunland spearmen, much of a muchness really when it comes to a fight between them and the Greenway Garrison spears. You give the slight edge perhaps to the Cardolan ones because of their slightly better defensive values. Then Hiriath men-at-arms coming in, that will even the fight up once again. Numerous the Rhudaur forces, but individually the Cardolan ones are going to be a little bit tougher with that more typical western style with their heavy armour. There's actually another unit of lumbermen here which have revealed themselves from hiding, and again going axe to axe with a very similar unit. Rhudaur axemen against the lumbermen. Again, in a straight-up fight between the two, if both are at full strength and they're both charging into one another, you give the edge to the Rhudaur axemen here. But the lumbermen, I think, have caught them by surprise, and as a result they have got the initial advantage, but there's another unit of Rhudaur axemen moving in. So again, this is more of a delaying measure than anything else from Cardolan, I would have suggested. This is the unit of Thieves of Tharbad revealing themselves as well. What are they going to do? Are they going to use their projectiles? It does look as though they are. Still no advance through the main corridor yet. Thieves of Tharbad, I mean, they can do a decent amount of damage here to the Rhudaur axemen. I mean, the good thing for Moria here, they'll be very pleased with how this is going so far, because Cardolan are taking damage. The wild men are struggling to advance and really gain solid momentum in this fight. Unit of bandits also revealing themselves, so plenty of hidden units that were out here from Thorn's army, which is decent to see. I'm surprised that the Rhudaur axemen are actually losing this fight to the bandits, but I think a lot of that has to do with the archer support which is coming in from behind. Those Rhudaur axemen are going to be very poor when it comes to trying to deal with archer fire. And here we have men-at-arms. Bouncer forces evenly matched, you can see. There are certainly more combatants from Rhudaur involved in this melee fight. That better defensive score that the Cardolan units have is paying dividends here, but more units are always going to be on the way forward. The conundrum here for the Wildmen is there is a time limit, so they do need to really press on and start getting through these defensive positions if they intend for that to be their victory condition map, but consequently they don't want to move forward and go into Cardolan's defence with everything they have if they intend to maybe join up with Cardolan later on to try and defeat the Goblin menace. Dunland clansmen. The Dunland clansmen, there's Gwathlo trackers. Obviously Gwathlo trackers can be on both sides of things, with Dunland taking some of the units from Cardolan, including actually the bandits that can potentially be a part of their faction. And the bandits, of course, they are a missile unit, and we haven't actually seen them really utilise their javelins at all. We've only seen them be revealed as an ambush unit and then engaged in melee, and the bandits are not a particularly strong melee combatant, as I'm sure you can tell. And Dunlanding veterans coming in is only going to hasten their demise. Those axes will be exactly the sort of thing for mopping up kind of weak, light melee fighters such as the bandits. It's a bit of a weird front line this from Cardolan. They're sending some units forward. I mean, the Dunedain captains are coming in, so this is by far the strongest unit we've seen in melee so far. And the Dunlanding veterans and clansmen will really not enjoy being in melee with them, but Cardolan need to make sure they're supported properly, because there's only so many of them, and if Dunland do decide to move forward in high numbers, it could be disastrous for them. Mercenary cavalry charging in, hitting the Gwathlo trackers from Dunland, and plenty of archers to follow that up as well. A charge into the rear of this front line, is that going to be enough to maybe rout them? Doesn't look like it. We haven't seen any units waver or rout at this point, which is a little bit strange, and that, if that's the case for both factions, it's actually going to be worse here for Cardolan, because as much as they were able to take advantage of that in the settlement, they would really be hoping for their cavalry to cause some shock damage to these front lines and send the wild men running for the hills. That is one way in which they can really do their business. And of course routing is also one of the ways that you can best deal with the forces of the Misty Mountains. So if they're not subject to breaking either, that would be most unfortunate for everyone else involved in this. Mercenary guilds are moving in. Like I said, they probably would have been better off against the goblins, but needs must in this situation. They need another infantry unit on the front line, so they have been committed. Greenway Garrison archers are there. Minhiriath sharpshooters are also in position, perhaps going after another scary unit like the Blackwells. I mean, this front line at this point is looking a little bit suspect. Looks like the Greenway Garrison archers are out of ammunition, so they're going to try and plug the gap themselves, but needless to say, they're not brilliant in melee, especially when it comes to trying to fight stuff like Blackwells. So things could go against them yet. Rhudaur are moving forward. Again, they're depleted, but Rhudaur will be fancying their chances here against Cardolan. Sharpshooters are in behind, but I'm not convinced they're going to be able to get the kind of damage done that they would want. Dunland clansmen. Mopping up some final units from the Cardolan ambush. Spears of Orthanc getting in position ready to potentially offer their support. The half-orcs are now moving forward from Dunland. Significantly tankier unit than the kind of thing they've been sending into these front lines so far, and actually the mercenary guildsmen will be fairly well utilised against the half-orcs, but there's not enough of them here. Being overrun by sheer numbers, which was always going to be a potential problem that Cardolan were going to have to face at some point in the battle. Minhiriath spears over here backing up the Dunland captains, which is a good mix. A nice defensive unit to go in and amongst the very damaging heavy swordsmen, and that should be enough to mop up this pocket of Dunland resistance. My garrison spears moving around to the flank. You can see that the goblins are on the move down here in this section of the field. So it's going to take them a little while to get there, and they're going to have to travel uphill as well, so they may very well be fatigued by the time they get there. Which is an interesting thing to consider. Minhiriath archers, what are they going to be firing at? Trying to fire at that front line over there. Spears of Orthanc are also firing, however. This is a rather wide advance from the Greenway Garrison spearmen, maybe trying to overlap on this front line, a fight that Cardolan are already doing fairly well in. The reinforcements are on the way. Again, another battle between two very low tier units of spears. Elsewhere, half-orc spearguard. I mean, now we're seeing another couple of units of Minhiriath men-at-arms move forward, which should help shore things up on this front line a little bit, but it's interesting. Cardolan have sort of pushed forward and they're a little bit further out from their defensive position, but it does allow them to shoot from the hills and maybe get a better angle from that perspective, so it's understandable why they've done that maybe. Minhiriath sharpshooters firing away, and they're in a really good position here, which has stabilised matters on this front line, at least temporarily. For Cardolan, those crossbow bolts hitting centre mass of all those Rhudaur swordsmen and Blackwells. But Rhudaur are seeing, excuse me, the danger. Rhudaur swordsmen are going to move in to engage the Minhiriath sharpshooters in melee. Now the sharpshooters of course can look after themselves in melee, pulling out their maces, but they really need to be utilising all their crossbow ammunition if they can, and they are going to retreat from the advancing Rhudaur soldiers as they attack them. Of course though, with the sharpshooters leaving this position and there's now a gap in this front line, it is basically tantamount to them abandoning this front line and accepting the fact that they aren't going to be victorious here. What about over here? I mean, there's cavalry on the move, mercenary cavalry. Whatever happens to those Dunland outrunners? More half-orcs on the front line. This time it's the Bane Guard, and they will be very useful, of course, against the Minhiriath units and the mercenary units, to be fair. Cracking through that armour, but with the pikes on the front line as well now, Cardolan should be able to keep this assault at arm's length fairly well. Cavalry in the backfield. There are the Dunland outrunners, perhaps trying to act in more of a defensive manner against the mercenary cavalry. That's not really a great idea, because the mercenary cavalry will have a significant edge in melee between those two units, and with the pikes pushing forward, helping out the Dunland captains and the Minhiriath units, Cardolan are actually doing very well on this front line now. The Wildmen may be running out of steam just a little bit, This is still a rather strong point of their front line over here. What was that then? Utilising their trebuchet? Maybe trying to go after the Spears of Orthanc? I mean, the Spears of Orthanc are an incredibly dangerous unit. Pound for pound, they are probably actually the strongest unit on the field. Don't know exactly what they're firing at, but... well, that was extremely ill-advised from Neville. I don't know what he was thinking, charging headlong into a pike line, and the Dunland Outrunners are going to pay the ultimate price for that. Myriath archers continuing to fire down, and they're going to be better in that kind of fight than the Gwathlo trackers are, certainly. Pushing in from the side of the Minhiriath men-at-arms as well as the pikes hold them from the front. I mean, you can see here the half-orcs are actually still doing reasonably well. The Dunland have also got more reinforcements that they can commit forward more readily, so maybe things are still looking a little bit dicey for Cardolan. There is movement in behind these lines now, the Gwathlo trackers and the Minhiriath spearmen moving that way. Boomer Garrison archers trying to hold Rhudaur swordsmen in melee, which they can do temporarily, and maybe this is what they need to get these Minhiriath sharpshooters to get a couple more volleys off, try and whittle down the strength that the wild men still have. Yeah, that's a decent volley. Again, it's into Rhudaur swordsmen, rather I mean, certainly not going to be a decisive unit, but they need to continue to do this kind of damage. They are getting up to charge speed here, though, the Rhudaur axemen. Unfortunately, though, their charge dissipates before they actually land it on the sharpshooters. There are other Cardolan units up here now as well. There's that ballista on the hill, which may be a cause for concern for the goblins. Still, these pikes hold on. The half-orc Baneguard are pushing in from the side, and they are managing to infiltrate the formation of the Cardolan pikes at least somewhat, which will be of concern. What's going on over here again? This pike formation as well is bent now, and that's going to be a bit of a problem, especially when it comes to a more aggressive unit like the Baneguard once again. Whatever happened to the Dunland captains? They're still in here. They have taken not crippling losses, but certainly losses to an extent. You can see here that Stormhawk's general is now moving in, and he is going to mop up the mercenary cavalry as Micro was lost on them. With wargs now on scene, and the goblins are starting to make an appearance over the hill. Goblin archers will arrive first and foremost. So now, I suppose the choice must be made by the wild men. What will they do? Will they redeem themselves, or will they continue to try and press forward for their original objective? Because I think at this point, Cardolan's best bet is certainly going to be, and perhaps always was, the time limit. Because I don't think they're going to be able to beat the Misty Mountains in a straight-up fight. They may be able to continue on against the wild men and beat them, but against another force, they're not really going to stand too much of a chance. So they're going to need to hope that that is going to be enough. Spears of Orthanc pushing forward very, very aggressively, trying to deal with that trebuchet, and I mean, you should be able to do it. There's Minhiriath men-at-arms, Half-Guard of Amon-Sul, but Spears of Orthanc have got that armour piercing in melee as well, so even with both of these two units, I'm not sure whether it's... based on the fact that they're surrounded, I think is going to make a bit of a difference. Rather fittingly as well, the general's actually positioned himself by chance right in the middle of these units. If they used up all their ammunition, I suppose this isn't the worst use of the Spears of Orthanc if Rhudaur intend to continue to fight Cardolan. I mean, this is a problem though as well. Now the wargs cresting the hill, Gwathlo trackers are still on top of the hill, but if the Misty Mountains are certainly going to want to try and disable Cardolan trebuchet for their own purposes as well. As they are now getting ready, the Goblin archers beginning to fire. Cardolan still with some resistance over here, but Minhiriath archers and Minhiriath spearmen over here as well. Rather interestingly, it looks as though the Rhudaur attack has actually faltered a little bit, but that's mainly because Rhudaur haven't been committing reinforcements by the looks of things, and they've been utilising their catapults at point-blank range as well. Minhiriath spearmen should be able to finish off this final clutch of Rhudaur forces. Maybe Rhudaur are sort of prepping for Moria's arrival. It looks as though that is the case, so maybe that is the case. At least the Rhudaur portion of the army might be joining with their fellow Arnorians. I'm not sure about the Dunlanders. Given Mevon's aggression to try and bring down that trebuchet, I'm not quite sure. Although now they're turning around once again, maybe to try and smash Cardolan to bits. Javelins being utilised. I'm still not entirely sure what the Wild Men's decision is going to be. I mean, I guess they're already in melee against Cardolan. If they can beat Cardolan themselves, then their victory has been won, but it looks as though the goblins aren't going to wait for them to make that call, and instead they are going to move in and just try and wipe everyone else from the field as quickly as they possibly can, which with their quality, it's a weird phrase to use when it comes to talking about the Misty Mountains, but with their quality they should be able to do that. Victory seems certain, only a fool could lose this battle. Defeat is a distinct possibility for the Greenway garrison. Minhiriath's spearmen are still fighting on the front line. Dunland's pikes have also now arrived. And there's not really much left of the Cardolan defences over here, so things have taken a bit of a turn for the worst. Half-Orc Baneguard are over here, trying to push forward to bring down the trebuchet once again. I mean, the trebuchet will fall, that much is almost certain at this point, with Stormhawk's army now here. The Black Uruks and the Mountain Uruk host all going to be too strong. There are Hearthguard over there, but they will have already taken a bit of a beating from the Spears of Orthanc. Will the trebuchet manage to escape? It might, but with how slow artillery tends to move, if the Misty Mountains really want to, they should be able to catch up to it. Ooh, and there's also the Trolls, so yeah, they will definitely be able to catch up to it. So this is going to be the end of this rather valuable defensive asset for Cardolan. Finally, it's been under a lot of pressure. It hasn't actually been firing its projectiles for quite a while at this point. They've been trying to get it out of the danger zone, but ultimately they are not going to have been successful at that. Ballista bolts raining down from on high now. I mean, Dunland is certainly battered and bruised at this point. Cave Trolls moving forward. They're going to go after this bit of the Cardolan defence. Yes, they are. Well, there finally goes Mevon's general. Spears of Orthanc finally paying the price. Rhudaur pushing forward, and as a result, I mean, the goblins certainly in no mood to take the slow approach with the wild men in the way. But considering the time, that is understandable. The goblins can't really afford to be too picky at this point. They just need to move forward and claim this ground for themselves. And with the wild men in the way, they need to kill them off anyway, but it does look as though the wild men are not going to choose the path of redemption this time. They are going to continue with their initial victory condition of finishing off Cardolan themselves. Rhudaur swordsmen have pushed up the hill, and Cardolan are going to put on their final stand in the highest reaches of the map, and again hoping that the time limit will do most of the work for them, I'm sure. Rhudaur, I think, will need to pick up the pace if they hope to try and beat that time limit. Minhiriath sharpshooters have been caught in melee. I mean, the armor piercing, as we've said several times in the past, is somewhat useful against trolls, but I mean, obviously the Misty Mountains have got the edge in terms of quality. And the announcer feels very confident, as well he should. If there was no time limit involved in this battle, and if the victory condition for Rhudaur and Dunland was not to finish off Cardolan and not really worry about what happens with the Misty Mountains, if it was a conventional fight, the Misty Mountains would very easily be in pole position to win this, but that isn't the case. And the Misty Mountains need to leverage their quality here in a much more aggressive manner than they would otherwise be doing. And there's too many units back over here, I think. They need to move forward with everything they have. I mean, you can see there is a route up into the hills over there to try and finish off Cardolan. That may be what all those heavy goblin infantry are going over to do, try and go after those Dwathlo trackers. Meanwhile, Goblin King's bodyguard. I mean, the loss of the general would be, of course, crippling for the goblins as well. So while they have to be aggressive, there is also that jeopardy that they could end up losing their general. You can see their general's actually leading the charge over here. It would be most unfortunate if he were to fall by the wayside at the hands of a unit of battered half-orc spear guard, but such is the way of things. Pikemen. Rangers. That's a unit that I didn't realise Cardolan had. I mean, that's certainly going to be good for dealing damage. Try and cut down on that Misty Mountains quality a little bit, but the more immediate threat may actually be Rhudaur as they come up the hill. Cardolan don't have all that much left to defend with, and Rhudaur are here at this point. Cardolan are almost, in many ways, running away from Rhudaur at this point because they know they'll be finished off fairly quickly. Very much on their last legs. There's the ballista as well. Anything over in this corner? No? I mean, Rhudaur are up on the hill. If they move forward and quickly take Cardolan's position, surely that means that the Wildmen have been victorious in this fight. It may very well be a highly Pyrrhic victory, considering the fact that even though the rules of the scenario are what they are, the Misty Mountains can simply take the spoils of war that the Wildmen have for themselves. A few units revealing themselves from hiding now. There's some Half-Guard of Amon-Sul, there's some Guacklo trackers, there's a little bit more of Cardolan left than I initially thought, but it's still not substantial enough to stop Rhudaur, and especially not the Misty Mountains. Mountain Orc Berserkers are heading up the hill. I mean, they are going to be very poor under arrow fire. Black Orcs of the Mountains. Point blank hits. Nothing that they have really is going to be super good at dealing with this in melee though, so they are going to need to go about their business at long range. They're going to engage them with the Minhiriath spears and then have all 3 units of archers trying to finish them off, which is the way to handle this situation. Nine Rangers scurrying away. More Troll Hunters. It's been a bit of a weird battle in terms of the action has happened in spits and spots all over the place, rather sporadically, and then there's been lulls in proceedings throughout. I suppose that's to be expected given there's a sort of pseudo free-for-all nature to it, which very often results in this sort of thing, but rather similar to the very last battle that I showed actually. Albeit that was more of a straight-up free-for-all, whereas this one has got decisions that have to be made in-game by the players involved. And they chose the path of evil, the Wildmen. I mean, there's still a fair amount in this battle to go, over 10,000 frames, so maybe Cardolan, from that point of view, you can at least say that they're going to do a pretty decent job when it comes to trying to run out the clock. Or perhaps you could say that Rhudaur are being far too slow over on the other side. Black Orcs of the Mountains chasing off the Guacklo trackers. Rhudaur are on the way over here as well. What's going on here? Oh, they've slid off the side. That's unfortunate. Classic artillery in Medieval 2. Don't put your artillery near a cliff, otherwise it will do that. Dunedain Rangers pulling back, so they're continuing to be able to get away. I think there's no retreat from over here though. I think this is the final position that they can actually retreat to before they come to a cliff that is impassable. They can continue to fight backwards, and of course at this point, if they do retreat down that way, the Misty Mountains and Rhudaur will be coming into conflict with one another to try and finish Cardolan off, so maybe that is the best way to deal with things over here. I mean, they're shooting at point blank into these units. Mountain Orc Berserkers will take a decent amount of damage, but the Mountaineer at Coast will be very much at home mitigating that kind of damage at range. Cave Trolls trudging up the hill. Still this one unit of Minhiriath Spears, which this is the only unit really of dedicated infantry that Cardolan have left. and they are surrounded, and they're ultimately going to be destroyed by the Uruk elements of the Misty Mountains army. Rhudaur on the way forward. What will Rhudaur do from this position now? I mean, they've already made their decision, surely. They've continued to attack Cardolan. So they cannot now turn around and try and curry favour with them, can they? Cardolan will be hoping that the wild men and the foul goblins do fight one another, and that is what's going to happen by the looks of things, by necessity really. Heavy goblin infantry going to get in the way of the advancing Rhudaur swordsmen. Elsewhere, you can see those ranger projectiles still coming in, and they're going to do a lot of damage to the clumped up Misty Mountains forces. Like I said, conventional victory for Cardolan isn't really possible, but by doing a lot of damage to the Misty Mountains, they will at least lessen the amount of venom that they're able to attack with. Maybe give Rhudaur the opportunity they need to also do as much damage as they can. The trolls are a bit of a problem because they can cover ground so quickly. They can really get into the few remaining Cardolan units that there are and try and finish them off. And now here comes the catapult shots. Half-Guard of Amon Sul, a very stretched unit this from Tommy the Wise, because they're going up against trolls, Mountain Uruk Coast and Mountain Orc Berserkers. I mean, they're a very tough and solid defensive unit, but this is going to be too much even for a unit that's able to take as much damage as they are. And also they're not going to be able to deal enough damage in return really against trolls and the like. That spear malice is really going to be hurting them in this kind of fight, even against the weaker in melee cave trolls. Rhudaur Axemen are here, that armour piercing useful against all of these goblin units. Misty Mountains have some choices to make. Well, what's going on over here? The goblins are pushing forward, Blackback Mountain Berserkers. Some rear guards here from Rhudaur to prevent this other force from the goblins moving forwards. They will be kept at arm's length, and there are pikes here as well, so the Blackback Mountain Berserkers, they're going to need some support if they're going to be able to get through here. Naturally though, they're not going to want to commit their general if they don't have to, given the victory conditions are what they are. Plenty of goblin infantry, plenty of javelins. Those javelins will be the most useful thing for trying to bash their way through this Rhudaur defence, which is pretty well considered. And also the Essenmoor's Troll Hunters are going to be in here, which is bad news actually for the Misty Mountains. I don't think this fight is actually going to be all that important in the grand scheme of things. I think that Rhudaur will be able to hold the Misty Mountains at bay for as long as they need to over here, but the fight of real consequence is the one that's happening over here, near to where Cardolan are taking up their position. Warg Riders are moving forward. I mean, this is a problem. The Cave Trolls, like I said, they're going to push forward. The Gwathlo Trackers are going to retreat. Whatever happened to the Rangers? Are they hidden? That may be the case. Which means they have to be found, which is a valid tactic. If they're looking to run down the clock, having a unit that's hidden will give them that valuable time they need. We're into the final 10k frames now, so this is the decisive moment. The Warg Riders are in here, the Catapult is doing its thing. I mean, this is going to be pretty tough on the Warg Riders. Still, we haven't seen any units routing, which makes me rather suspicious about what sort of setting Theron used to create it. If routing was turned off, I'm not entirely certain why, because it would have been, considering the factions involved, it would have been a very relevant mechanic to keep. I'm not entirely sure why we haven't seen any of it, but it is what it is. There's still that Cardolan Ballista, so I would assume, based on the fact that Rhudaur are paying this unit no heed, that maybe they have had a change of heart, after all. Seems a little bit late. They continued to attack Cardolan when the goblins did arrive, so maybe trying to ride on their coattails to victory now, but I suppose given the situation is what it is, you can't really blame them. Given the kind of force that the goblins were able to attack with. I mean, standard goblin infantry isn't really going to be all that effective in this situation. They're really relying on the Blackback Berserkers, but the damage they took at the hands of the Etenwar's Trollhunters has already done a pretty decent amount of damage to them. Snaga Skirmishers firing their payload as well, another unit of Goblin Infantry. They may at some point, the Misty Mountains, just have to throw in that unit of Goblin King's Bodyguard, just because that quality will be useful. Catapult shots, more heavy Goblin Infantry on the way. Technically speaking, if the Wildmen have had a change of heart, then the victory conditions, to make sense, would have to include the Misty Mountains now defeating Rhudaur and Dunland, which again, from the conventional perspective, they should still be able to do. But within the time limit, I'm not quite so sure, and also I don't think there's actually the rules of the scenario. Blacklow Trackers. Another unit? Surely there's Dunedain Rangers somewhere. And they're peeling off now, leaving Cardolan to their own devices. Some weird decisions being made based on what the rules were of this scenario, I have to say. And a lot of them, you'd have to say, are to the benefit of Cardolan, because if this continues, the timer will run out, and ultimately word will have reached Tharbad. Decent hits there from the catapult, but surely that is going to be short-lived. Etenwar's Trollhunters, spears in hand. Again, a good point-blank shot into the Black Uruks of the mountains. At least hitting some of the... Well, there goes the Cardolan General taking a charge from the Warg Riders. Trolls on the front line, so they're going to try and defend their catapult now, which, as they get around the side there, they may very well be able to get another volley off. Blacklow Trackers, one Hearthguard of Amon Sul remains. Dunedain Rangers coming across. Need to try and deal with these Warg Riders, because cycle charging into these Blacklow Trackers and the Dunedain Rangers could be one way in which the Misty Mountains could win this game before anyone really knows what's going on. But with the Rangers getting into melee as well, I don't fancy the Warg Riders' chances. Again, if routing was a mechanic which was active, the Warg Riders would almost certainly be wavering at this point, if not routing already. Of course, this is where their lower defence is going to come back to haunt them. Goblin Archers shifting around. Another unit of Gwathlo Trackers. So 2 units of Gwathlo Trackers and a unit of Dunedain Rangers is what Cardolan have left, and they really do need to think about killing them off, the Misty Mountains, seeing as they're the only ones that could reach them at this point, and I would assume that the defection has happened. I don't think there's anything left of Dunland really, it's just Rhudaur that remains largely, based on what I can see. Goblin King's Bodyguard have moved forward, so the Misty Mountains General is now in harm's way. Again, I feel as though this is kind of necessary. The Misty Mountains, a bit more urgency is needed, and a unit of that quality, if they can buckle this tight defensive position, is going to be a problem for them. Meanwhile, back in behind enemy lines over here, some sort of unit is being ripped apart. It's Goblin Infantry as the Black Bolts reveal themselves. Mevin looking like the last of what remains of the Dunland portion of the Wildman army. A little bit further down there's a unit of Goblin Archers as well, but looking at this situation, they're going to be able to surround. Goblin King's Bodyguard have managed to get through. They probably don't want to get back into melee over here now, purely because they don't want to risk their general against a unit like Black Bolts. That was this general over here. Mountain Uruk Coast are on the way across. I mean, a single unit of Mountain Uruk Coast is going to be a bit of a problem for these Cardolan units at this point. Gwathlo Trackers are not great in melee, even though there are still a decent number of them. Dunedain Rangers have got good melee defense for an archer, but again, they're not really going to have the damage to be able to go toe-to-toe with a unit of armour-clad heavy Uruks. Goblin Archers going to be less good in melee, but again, they could be able to surround this unit of Dunedain Rangers. It's going to be a problem. 93 of them, they outnumber the Dunedain Rangers as well, so this could be a decisive moment. This could be where the Misty Mountains defeats Cardolan once and for all, unless they have some extra ammunition, which they do. Shoot into the backs, and let's not forget, it's not as if the Dunedain Rangers are the key unit. The Misty Mountains need to kill off all that remains of Cardolan. A little bit surprised they're going after that other unit of Mountain Coast, to be honest, but it is what it is. The rest of Stormhawk's army may actually be losing a bit of ground at this point. We're starting to see the heavy goblin halberds get involved, so that phalanx at this late stage, like I said, is actually proving to be a factor, but can it be the factor? That armour piercing will be also useful against the Etenmoor's troll hunters. Rather fittingly, dead trolls on the floor. And yeah, that's a good point actually. The Misty Mountain, it was a conventional battle as well. I feel as though they are taking enough of beatings to the point where the wild men may actually be the ones who win a conventional battle at this stage. Which is worrying for them. May mean from a... Again, it's kind of hard to tell because you can't actually physically change sides in a battle partway through like you can in a game like Age of Empires, but if the wild men have gone over to Cardolan's side, that would mean that things are looking pretty grim for the goblins, after all. The Black Bolts ripping their way through what remains of the lowly goblins over here. Some armour upgraded goblin infantry, such as they are, doing their best. This unit of pikes, exhausted, very slow, moving up that hill. Mountaineer Coast are over here. Where is the Goblin King's bodyguard? What became of them? I don't know what became of them necessarily, but again, there's a lot of halberds over here. If Rhudaur get caught in a frontal engagement like this, I don't really fancy their chances in a protracted fight, but as I mentioned, the key battle could actually be over here. Dunland Rangers, with the support of those archers, they have managed to cut down this unit of Mountaineer Coast. There goes a Rhudaur general, or the Rhudaur general. So the wild men have now lost both their generals. Not that it really matters, with routing seemingly not involved or a factor in this battle. So the loss of the general actually outside of the rules of the scenario for the Misty Mountains isn't really all that relevant. 127 Gwathlo trackers, 36 Gwathlo trackers, 28 Dunland Rangers. This is all that remains of Cardolan. This is all they need. And time ticks down. I don't know whether they're going to be able to get over here in time to actually kill off all of these units at this point, so I feel as though Cardolan may be on for the victory here. Which, with better planning, probably would not have been the case. There is a unit over here, by which I mean one Menhiriath man-at-arms, so I mean, that's also another problem with having no routing in this. It means that Cardolan could technically sequester a guy like this in a corner somewhere, and just win the game by stealth that way, which isn't really in the spirit of things. I don't think that's going to be the case anyway, because Cardolan have got all their units over there and everyone knows where they are. The goblins have been bogged down against Rhudaur for quite some time at this point, and this may end up being a key factor in this. I mean, is this... There's one Goblin King's bodyguard left. I mean, if he dies to the catapult crew, surely that means the Misty Mountains lose, and I mean this is going to be the end of him, surely. The Black Wolds are here. I mean, he may be able to cut his way through all the catapult crew, but he's not going to be able to do so against the Black Wolds. Their damage is going to be far too great, and surely this is going to be the end of the Misty Mountains' effort. I think this may be the goblins being defeated. Going to try and run away. He does manage to slip away as well. Fortuitous for the Misty Mountains. Those spears of Orthanc could end up shooting him. You can see them cranking their crossbows in the distance, rather ominously. Are they going to try and shoot him? It doesn't look like they're going after him, sadly. And Rhudaur are going after Cardolan. How about that? I don't know whether they came to a temporary truce or whether it was just by sheer coincidence that the Misty Mountains were caught between the wild men and Cardolan. But Rhudaur toyed, or the wild men in general toyed with the idea perhaps of redeeming themselves, but now I think they're going to try and go for their initial victory condition once again. Do they have enough time? I mean, with Cardolan moving forward like this, they put themselves in harm's way. It makes things more interesting, certainly. And there goes the Misty Mountains General. So, I mean, I think, based on the rules of the scenario, the Misty Mountains lose as a result of that. I mean, they're going to lose regardless, because this is the only pocket of resistance they have remaining, and it's going to be destroyed by the Wild Man. So the goblins have been destroyed. The Black Walls are over here. Now the real question is, do Rhudaur have the time necessary to kill off the remaining Cardolan units? They need to hoof it over here and kill off these Gwathlo trackers and Dunland Rangers as quickly as they can. I mean, these Black Walls have been surrounded pretty quickly, and they've probably already lost their hit points, which means defensively they're going to be in really bad shape. Yes, they're only up against Gwathlo trackers and Rangers, but that will be enough to kill off a unit of Berserker class units which have lost their hit points. At least most of them have. Defeat seems certain. And the Wildman's still intent on finishing off the goblins first, by the looks of things, even though I think, like I said, based on the rules of the scenario, I think they've already lost, but I mean, their units are still fighting. They may not be able to win, but they can ruin the day for somebody else, and it looks as though they may be attempting to do that against the Wildman. There's still that Ballista unit as well. Does that not count as a unit that need to be defeated? Spears of Orthanc. Trading back and forth with the Gwathlo trackers, who still have a bit of ammunition, and they are going to be firing into the Dunman Hunters and Dunman Pikemen, which is definitely the right call. Try and whittle down that Rhudaur manpower as best as they are able. The Rhudaur catapult could still prove to be a real problem. Going to need to spread themselves out. Dunland Rangers are celebrating. There's precious little time left for Rhudaur. They hit one unlucky soul, taking his head off with that catapult projectile in mid-flight. I mean, they don't really have the time to be messing around with these heavy goblin halberds at this point. And again, this is where the lack of routing is probably affecting the scenario a little bit again, because these heavy goblin halberds, with the loss of their general being surrounded and with the Black Walls right here, they would be routing at this point. The Misty Mountains, it's just part of what they are. The fact that they're not routing, I mean, this has been to the benefit and the hindrance of every faction on the field in this scenario, so it is what it is, but I really feel as though routing should have been something which was happening in this battle, because it would have made things a little bit more dynamic, especially, like I said, given the fact that the two factions perhaps most well known for routing in the game are Cardolan and the Misty Mountains. So, Gwathlo trackers continuing to fire, Dunland Rangers getting involved in the melee. I mean, I think that Cardolan, they're not going to be able to kill them all off. The Ballista crew, for example, is still going to be alive. They're not going to be able to finish off all of the Rangers and Gwathlo trackers regardless, so Cardolan have managed to hold out. It's been quite a weird fight, but an interesting one nonetheless. Still the projectiles continue to flow. The final 1,000 frames are here. I mean, the catapult is not going to be able to kill off all of them because the formation is simply too wide, and also they're using rotting meat, which in a battle where routing is not present, rotting meat is utterly useless. A direct hit can actually kill off single unit models, but of course that isn't going to be enough to secure victory for Rhudaur anyway. Dunland Rangers being run through by what remains of these units. I mean, there's not actually that many units left on the field. Even as far as a conventional battle goes, it would have been fairly close. It would have been a Wildmen victory in that regard, but I mean, even then, would it? 61 catapult crew? It would have been questionable even then. I mean, I think it would have been a Rhudaur victory, but it would have been very close even without the rather complex rules that were involved in this one. Either way, the forces of good are going to be able to meet their victory conditions. The forces of evil will not. Rhudaur and Dunland had a chance to join the winning side, and they did not take it. The catapult crew moving forward. Rhudaur clansmen, they're not going to be able to kill off the Gwathlo trackers in time because we are rapidly approaching the final whistle here. And that is going to be that. So a bit of a strange one, quite unlike anything we've seen before. And that is that. So yeah, I do feel as though maybe a little bit of refinement would do this scenario, this type of scenario, some good. But regardless of that, it was a rather interesting one to behold anyway. Like I said, I mentioned it several times in the fight, but I really feel as though it would have benefited from routing being active. I don't quite know how routing wasn't a factor in this battle, but it was clearly disabled for all the factions, because otherwise we certainly would have seen routing from the Misty Mountains and Cardolan and the Wild Man. I mean, Dunland's morale is not that great. It says something when the faction on the field with the best morale is Rhudaur. But yeah, it is what it is. Rhudaur actually getting tons of kills as well, 4,000 kills, plenty of really high numbers armies on the field, considering this wasn't really a battle with all that many really high quality units. That one Misty Mountains army was the only one that had sort of a mid to high quality focus to it as well. So yeah, it is what it is. I would like to see more of this kind of scenario from Theron if he's interested in making them, because I feel as though as time goes along they would get more refined, and that would do them a lot of good, I think. Because this is the sort of thing which, when factions have got to make decisions on the fly about who they're going to fight against in the battle, it does make for rather interesting things. It had a free-for-all flavour to it, but wasn't actually a free-for-all, that sort of thing. And we've seen this kind of battle twice in a row now, and it's definitely not as formulaic as regular sieges go. But yeah, Cardolan the victors in the end. Let's see what did the damage for the Misty Mountains army, because that was what we were watching from the perspective of. Blackbrook Berserkers did actually some good damage before they threw themselves on the Rhudaur pipeline. 121 kills on the Black Uruks. Cave Trolls did very well. I mean, the Cave Trolls with their speed and manoeuvrability could have been the thing to allow the Goblins of Moria to actually win this, but in the end they didn't quite have the staying power to do that. The Warg Riders were also used very effectively, but by the time the Goblins arrived on the scene there were plenty of gaps for the Wargs to take full advantage of, and they did. 114 on Heavy Goblin Halberds, yeah. Few units getting over 100, few getting low kills, but that's pretty much what you'd expect from the Goblins. Goblin King's Bodyguard doing okay, but in this smaller army which Lango was commanding, it was the Javelins that really did the thing. But then this was a bit of more of a supporting army anyway, so that makes a decent amount of sense. And yeah, Rhudaur in the end, Rhudaur and Dunland, the Wild Men. Initially it looked like they had joined Cardolan to try and finish off Moria. They would have been able to do so regardless, but then they decided to try and finish off Cardolan anyway, and they were not able to do so in the allotted time period, so in the end they have been thwarted and their chance at redemption forever gone, as Cardolan now, with their messengers managing to get word back to the capital and a better defence, will be able to be mustered. Be interesting to see if there was some sort of follow-up to this battle as well, because I feel as though based on how it ended there could be some sort of reprisal, as Cardolan maybe attack into the foothills of Dunland, or maybe head towards the Misty Mountains to try and deal with some goblin outcroppings. Irregardless, big thank you to Theron for sending me this battle replay, and hopefully there will be more to come in the future. I think there is going to be another one as well. I don't know if it would be a follow-up to this one, but I think there was a message that he sent me regarding sending me something else, so maybe we'll be seeing that in the not too distant future. And yeah, big thanks to all the players as well for being a part of this battle replay. Always good to see more custom scenarios. As for what's coming next, there will be a battle which Sin of the Dark Cloud sent me, which is going to be between Numenor and Harad. That will be the very next battle to come out. And following on from that, there are a couple more that I have in Reforged as well. Another one that I have in Silmarillion, which will be coming out in the coming weeks, probably within the next 2 or 3 weeks at some point. And there will also be another Rise of Mordor top 5, this one regarding the Spear Infantry in the game. So that's the initial... Well, that's really what you're going to be seeing for the next month or so throughout the month of February. That will be the content that will be heading out. Further on from that, I can't really be too sure, but again, as I will, I'm sure, mention time and again, this is probably going to be a rather tumultuous year, but hopefully in a way that's good for the channel. So yeah, big thank you to Theron and all the players once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.